Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is Bob Kernen, the Chief Operating Officer of jacapps. We are very lucky today to have Fred Jacobs of Jacobs Media here with us, also the founder of jacapps. And we're going to talk about some of the really interesting things that came out of this year's 2019 Techsurvey. Fred?
Bob, thank you. Techsurvey, a very rich study. I'll walk you through the methodology in a moment. But yeah, what we're going to take a look at today are some of the high points defining radio's mobile opportunity based on our Techsurvey data, but also our trips to the Consumer Electronics Show, better known these days as CES. So let's jump into the presentation and first talk about methodology here. It's important you understand what the sample is all about. Huge sample, 519 commercial radio stations across North America participating, generating a whopping 50,652 responses. It was done earlier this year, Jan and early Feb of 2019. Now, here's the key factor. Most of the respondents are members of these radio stations databases. However, a number of stations also posted links on their websites or their social media pages. It is an online survey. We do market weighting using Nielsen data so that, say, 400 interviews from a market like Philadelphia count for more than a smaller market like Poughkeepsie. And here's again the thing to keep in mind. Unlike a Gallup survey or one of those Pew reports that are constructed to represent the population based on age, gender, and ethnicity, this is an opt-in survey. It doesn't represent all radio listeners or even all listeners in each participating station's audiences. Again, these are commercial radio listeners. I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the population tends to produce about 80% of the results. And if you buy into that, this is the 20. This is the core audience here and how they see the landscape. Well, the first thing that we jump into with Techsurvey is the whole line between traditional radio listening and digital radio listening. And the way we get at this is we ask our respondents to think back to a typical week listening to their favorite station, the station that sent them the survey. We give them a list of all the different touch points that they could use to listen to the station, and we ask them to tell us by percentages where they actually listen to the home station. So let's take a look at the pie chart for Techsurvey 2019, and you can see the biggest slice is in-car listening. 43% of commercial radio consumption is people listening to a regular radio in a vehicle. The second biggest slice, dark blue there, sort of at the top of the pie, regular radio listening at home, work, or school. So those two big pieces there can be combined, and that's what we call traditional up there on the upper right. 65% for the average station in Techsurvey listening to their favorite stations on traditional radios. But 31% are listening in the digital space. And certainly for this webinar, that's really going to be the focus. And I'm moving my cursor now over some of those digital touch points. You can see a lot of people are streaming. 7% of all consumption now, mobile apps, smart speakers, which we're going to talk about here as well, and even podcasts, part of the equation. Now, you might be wondering, well, that's 2019. What did it look like last year? Well, sure enough, last year, traditional radio listening was about 5 points higher. So it is clearly dropping off, whereas digital was lower, and now we see it coming up. But when you really go back and start looking at this data by generation, this is where you really begin to see some of the most important breaks. Now, here are millennials, right? Traditional radio listening, only 61% of their consumption, digital making up 35%. And look at the size of these pie slices down here on the left side in green. 20% share, if you will, or a slice of listening to the home station on a computer stream, 8% mobile apps, smart speakers, 5%, podcasts, 2%. So clearly millennials more into the digital side of the spectrum. Now, where it really gets dramatic is when we go back and we actually take a look at the last 7 years of Techsurvey and actually trace that traditional listening trajectory, which of course is heading down. It was 85% 7 years ago, all the way down now to 65% this year. And then conversely, we look at the digital axis and we can see that it is more than doubled from 14 to 31%. So you can definitely see a trend here as we look at the last 7 years of Techsurvey. A lot of traditional radio listening is still going on, but digital now a much bigger factor than it used to be.
So one of the places where we're seeing the strongest growth is in the area of smart speakers. But of course, there's a bigger thing at play here beyond just the smart speaker, and that is the whole notion of voice interaction with technology. So let's take a look at some of them in that space.
And to Bob's point, if you think about the voice platform as these cylindrical devices sitting in living rooms or these little hockey pucks occupying nightstands now, you're really missing the bigger trend. I mean, yes, smart speakers are the gadgets that we are familiar with that work with voice, but the entire voice platform itself is really beginning to permeate consumption. And so let's actually get into voice commands and how people use them. And of course, as it turns out, more people actually have used voice commands on their smartphone, right? A lot of people holding up that phone and saying, hey, Siri, find me a gas station, right? That's half of consumption. A quarter, though, say that they actually have interacted with voice on a smart speaker. And here comes the car again, which we've already touched on. About a fifth of our overall sample has used voice commands in their cars. Then TVs, right? I'm an Xfinity client, for better or for worse, and the remotes there are great in terms of finding favorite programs. So as you can see, voice commands are not confined to smart speakers. They really involve a lot of gadgets. Now, the reason why this is so important for radio broadcasters is that particularly in the home, regular AM/FM radios are beginning to disappear. And you can see that at the top of the chart that we're looking at now. Here's Techsurvey 2016, a few years ago. 89% of our radio-centric sample, remember who these people are, had a working AM/FM radio at home that they used, slipped a bit the next year, and then these last couple of years, we see in-home radio ownership dropping to 83%. And again, these are core radio listeners, and even they are less likely to actually have a radio at home. Look down to the generations and you can see we stuck a big ugly red arrow next to millennials. Fewer than 7 of every 10 of them have a working radio where they live. So that's why the whole smart speaker revolution, as we call it, is so darn compelling, because while radios may be disappearing from homes, smart speakers are growing at a really big clip. You can see that at the top of this chart. From 2017 to 2018 in Techsurvey, smart speaker ownership almost doubled. And then again this year, up to 27%. Now, we've been tracking tech trends now in Techsurvey for about 15 years, and I can tell you this is very much what the iPhone looked like back in 2005, 2006, 2007, the same rate of growth. Demographically, there's no gender story. Millennials and Xers more likely to own a smart speaker. But as you can see, even a quarter of boomers, 1 in 4, have a smart speaker at this point. So this is a technology that a lot of people own. Here in the States, and this is not the case in Canada and in other parts of the world, but here in the US, the Amazon products really have a nice big lead over Google. And then look down there below, the Apple HomePod, right? This is one of these areas where Apple may have been first with voice in terms of Siri, but is way down the pecking order now. A lot of different theories for this. Many people blame the fact that the Apple HomePod is very expensive, great speakers, but at a very high price. and frankly, without a lot of the versatility and abilities that the Amazon and Google products have. So Amazon, a really big deal if you are an American radio station. And to give you an idea of how this whole space has really proliferated and grown, on the left is Techsurvey 2018, on the right 2019. Look down there at the bottom, the percentage of people who own a smart speaker with 2 or more. A year ago, that was 42% of smart speaker owners. Now it's up to 49%. So chances very good that if you own one, you probably have bought another or another or another. Now, here's a trend that isn't as exciting or happy, but it's true. And this comes down to skills, which are very much like apps for smart speakers. And here we're isolating Amazon Alexa owners, last year on the left, this year on the right. And look at the blue slice there. People who say, yeah, I own one of these devices, but I don't have any skills downloaded. That actually is going up from year to year. And it really underscores just how clunky, how's that for a technical term, the whole idea of skills still is. It can be confusing to a lot of people using the proper language, having to enable skills. It is a bit of a mess, and you can really see that playing out here on these two pie charts. So even as smart speakers grow, people's inclination to actually use these skills is not growing. Now, what do people actually use smart speakers for? Basically tied for first are people just sort of asking general questions, right? How many ounces in a gallon? Or, hey, what's the weather in Detroit, right? Alexa, tell me that. And so there you go, you can get that info. About 1 in 4 are using it to set a timer. But here's the good news, and that's why we redden that bar. About 1 in 4 say, I am actually using my smart speaker to listen to an AM/FM radio music station. So this is one of the reasons why so many people in radio are excited. Now remember, this isn't the overall population. These are radio listeners. And so chances are pretty good when they buy one of these devices, they're going to be listening to a music station that is AM/FM, and by a lesser margin, but still significant, 15% say listening to spoken word programming on AM/FM radio stations as well. But people aren't going to understand, as we have learned, that your radio station is available in the Amazon Alexa product, for example, unless you're promoted. And so one of the questions that we have been asking the past couple of years, you can see it at the bottom of the pie chart, have you heard any AM/FM radio stations talking about or promoting smart speakers on the radio recently? 37% say yes, 4 of every 10 say no, and then the fifth just really aren't sure. But when we trend that, and I'm moving my cursor over there to the trend, you can see we sort of beat the drums on this last year, and I think we may have helped move the needle a bit. The incidence of hearing promos for smart speakers has gone up markedly from 31 to 37%. Men are more likely to have heard this messaging, as are millennials and Xers, and those who prefer spoken word radio stations. Now, here's the exciting news, and that is this, that 1 in 5 smart speaker owners actually say that since getting this device, they're actually spending more time listening to AM/FM radio stations. And you can see that in these two slices that I'm cursoring over now. About 1 in 5, 19% say they're listening to a little more or a lot more broadcast radio since getting one of these devices, as opposed to 8% saying a little less or a lot less. So that's a real solid net positive for broadcast radio listening. And I think the really cool thing about the demographic chart here, which shows people listening to more radio, is really how consistent it is across these demographic groups. Yeah, our Gen Zs are up a little bit more than the other generations, but when we look at millennials, Xers, and boomers, as you can see, the chances of actually listening to more radio now that you have a smart speaker is in fact pretty darn consistent across all these groups. Now, here's another trend that is very, very important, and that is Amazon Alexa and Google Voice coming to cars. Amazon has a brand new product that we actually saw at CES this year. It's called Echo Auto, and it's an aftermarket product that retails now for only about $25. And in essence, what it will do is bring the Alexa platform into pretty much any car by either plugging in through the cigarette lighter, Bluetooth, or the aux-in jack. Now, a number of car manufacturers are actually baking Amazon Alexa technology into all their cars. Ford was the first to do this, but hey, if you're driving a 2008 Subaru Outback and you want Alexa, but you don't want a brand new car, this little Echo Auto device can do the trick for you. 1 million pre-orders as of last January. They haven't started shipping yet, but clearly, as you can see, Alexa coming to cars. And so most of the people on this webinar are radio people. We have been used to using presets in cars and teaching the audience that you need to preset our radio station on one of your 5 or 6 buttons. Well, all of a sudden now you can see how discovery of radio is going to change thanks to voice. So speaking of the car.
Yeah, so speaking of the car, this is another place where technology is really making a big difference for our clients. And we've done a lot of work in this space, obviously led by these very tech surveys from previous years that showed this trend really coming. So beyond Echo Auto, let's look at a couple of the other in-car platforms and what people are doing there.
Thanks, Bob. Well, first of all, the incidence of in-car media ownership. And when we say in-car media ownership, we are talking about vehicles with systems like Ford Sync, Audi Connect, Chrysler Uconnect. And you can see it has steadily gone up with each passing year. Bob and I are actually sitting in suburban Detroit, Michigan, the home, the Motor City, as it is. And we can tell you that pretty much everything rolling off the assembly line now has a touch screen and is connected. So we can expect this trend to continue to grow as people trade in their older vehicles and buy and lease new cars. So what is the impact of having a connected car on radio listening? Well, in order to make that determination, we ask our respondents in Techsurvey to think back to a typical weekday and let them tell us, using, again, percentages, what share of listening belongs to what audio device or source. So as you can see, the #1 most listened source in the car is good old AM/FM radio. 59% of all in-car listening is broadcast radio. And you can see by far that is the biggest piece of the pie. #2 is Sirius XM satellite radio at 18%, personal music collection around 9%, then streaming audio, Pandora, Spotify, those types of streaming services, and then podcasts and audiobooks. So for radio broadcasters, this is a pretty happy slide, right? A 59 overall piece of the in-car radio listening pie. Although I would ask you to think back maybe 15 years when the only thing in a vehicle in the dashboard was an AM/FM radio and a CD player, right? So what would radio share have been back then in people's cars? I don't know. We didn't ask the question. We weren't doing Techsurvey, but I've got to believe it would have been north of 80%, right? Well, here's the real key. What happens when people get a connected car? So watch the pie change as I move the slide to those who have an in-car media system. And that share of AM/FM listening in the car drops from 59 to 50%. That's a net loss of 9 points, as you can see. And look who the big winner is, satellite radio, going all the way up to 25% of in-car consumption. That's a 7-point rise. Most of the other sources really don't move a lot. So you're probably wondering, why is satellite radio the main beneficiary when people get a connected car? we think there's a few different reasons. One is many people have never experienced satellite radio before until they get that free trial when they buy or lease a new vehicle. And so they pig out, right? They've got 200 channels. The music channels are commercial free. They've got all the spoken word stuff, all kinds of specialty channels, that type of thing. So there's that, but we think the other reason is that it is as easy to find and preset satellite radio stations in vehicles as it is AM FM stations in cars. And that probably is a big reason why satellite radio really gets a boost when people get a connected car. What about those millennials? Well, millennials, again, not as inclined to listen to AM FM radio in the car to begin with, right? Only 52% share or piece of the in-car action is AM FM radio. And here's where you can see streaming and podcasts definitely becoming more and more of a factor in people's cars. Now, Bob alluded earlier, and on that title slide, you actually saw a couple of pictures of what Apple CarPlay and Android Auto look like in cars. Essentially, what they do is throw your phone onto your touchscreen, and many of the apps that are actually on your phone show up in your car. Not all of them do. jacapps actually does develop its apps so that, in fact, they do show up in both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And so as more and more people get these systems in their cars, it becomes important that not only is your station available on the radio, which of course it is, but that also your icon shows up on the desktops of Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Now, these systems are still very emergent at this point. As you can see, a lot of people do not have them yet because probably they are driving older vehicles, or they may have a newer vehicle and not even know that they have it equipped. But you can see about 1 in 10 says they have CarPlay, a little bit less than that, Android Auto. But if you've been watching car commercials over the past couple of years, you've noticed that car companies are beginning, especially with Apple CarPlay, to market that feature in these commercials. It obviously tests well in their research. And when we look at how people actually feel about Apple CarPlay among those who actually have the system, you can see it's quite positive there. You look at the share of people who say they love it and use it all the time. That's about 1 in 3 users. And on the right, you can see how that breaks down demographically. The younger the driver, the younger the passenger, the more likely they give a thumbs up to Apple CarPlay. Here it is for Android Auto, not quite as positive, only 29% expressing love grades for Android Auto, but certainly demographically the exact same pattern. The younger the driver, the younger the passenger, the more likely that she feels good about having Android Auto in the car. All right, well, here comes the star of our show, mobile and apps.
So mobile's not the hot new news anymore. It's really gone from being, the cool new thing now after 10 years to being the thing. Mobile really is the platform where most consumers spend most of their time. To the point that that Tim Cook of Apple is actually worried about the amount of time we're spending using his devices. But there are some very interesting things going on in the mobile space, and we asked our survey respondents about it. So let's go through and see what they had to say.
Well, you teed that one up well, Bob, because some of the things that Apple and some of the other players in the space are thinking about is actually smartphone addiction. And so in Techsurvey, we've actually been asking about that over the last several years. Agree, disagree. I'm addicted to my mobile phone. When you look at the pie chart and you can see 1 in 10 smartphone owners say, yep, that's me. And 1 in 4 agree with that statement. When we look over at the demographics on the right, it's sort of hovering in the mid to high 30% range of people who admit addiction. The really honest people, I think, are Gen Z and millennials who absolutely are in touch with their bad habits and know, in fact, that they are addicted to their phones. And I would suggest that everybody else is probably lying, right? Or certainly is in denial about their addiction. Now, how does this manifest itself in the world of radio? Well, it's changed the way that people wake up. And because it has actually altered that, it means that fewer people are waking up with a morning show blaring out of a clock radio. That's because when we ask our sample, how do you wake up in the morning? Almost half now say with their mobile phone playing a built-in embedded ringtone. Less than 1/5 are waking up with a clock radio playing a morning show like Dave and Chuck the Freak here at the Riff in Detroit. And then there's a bunch of people, sadly, waking up to a clock radio with just a buzzer. But if you want to see how that actually has trended over time, we broke out the last 5 years for you. And you can see in 2015, it was a dead heat between people waking up with a clock radio on top, a mobile phone on the bottom. But with each passing year, clock radio is slipping, mobile phone clearly increasing. And where you really see that head on is when you look at that by generation, right? Clock radio wake up in blue, smartphone tablet wake up in that kind of pinkish color, and you look at Gen Z and millennials, it's no contest. Look at Xers. More than half of them now are waking up with their phones. And with boomers, my prediction is for Techsurvey 2020, more boomers will actually be waking up with their phones than with a clock radio. So let's talk about the apps that people actually download on their smartphones and tablets. Among those who own these devices, which is the vast majority of our respondents, more than half say they have downloaded a music-ish app. 44% say they have downloaded an app for a radio station or radio stations. 36% have a newsy app, and about 3 in every 10 have a sports-oriented app of some kind. Here we're isolating those who have downloaded a radio or music app. Actually, it's slipped a little bit over the past few years, not by an alarming rate, but again, just pointing it out to you. But when you actually look at the generational trajectory of downloading a radio or a music app, it is unmistakable. The younger the respondent who owns a smartphone or a tablet, the greater the likelihood that he or she has downloaded a radio or music app. So what are the most popular ones? YouTube, just by a hair. Now, Pandora is number 2, but as you can see there, that little note on the side, 54% last year, down to 50% this year. It continues to slip every year. We actually saw quite a bit of rust on Pandora throughout Techsurvey, and here's another indicator. About 42% have downloaded an app like the kind jacapps makes for radio stations. That's a pretty good percentage considering that many of the stations who participate in Techsurvey do not have their own app. iHeartRadio at 4 of every 10. Then comes Spotify, Amazon Music, Shazam, and so forth. Radio.com, which has gotten a lot of attention in the past couple of years as Entercom has definitely made a push. Emerging here almost at double digits with 9%. Bob, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the difference between an aggregated app and an individual station app, because this is what you do.
Right. We wanted to take a look at this because of radio.com and iHeartRadio, and as you see here on the left, TuneIn. We asked people about how they felt about these kind of aggregators versus a single station app, which is like what you see right now on the right-hand side. That's KS95 in Minneapolis. And so you can see the difference in experience and the difference in sort of brand representation. And that really, I think, bears out if you look at the data that we got back on Techsurvey.
And so here we are. This is the first year we've ever attempted to ask this, but we did give them descriptions of different mobile app formats. And what we found is that a majority, 53%, say my preference would be that my favorite radio station creates an app just for the station. About 14% say, no, you know what? I'd rather have an app that has hundreds of radio stations that allow me to stream all kinds of things. And then this group up here on top, about a third say, I want my cake and eat it too, right? I want my favorite station to be available on aggregated or umbrella apps, as well as having their own app. And honestly, our advice is try and get yourself everywhere that you can, right? I mean, get yourself on an aggregated app, but as you can see, more people say, I would love to have an app for my favorite radio station. In general, how do people feel about their apps? And this isn't just jacapps, this is everybody here. Anybody who has a radio station app of one kind or another, most people are pretty happy, right? A majority give that app excellent grades, about a third give it good grades, very few fares and poors along the way. Women tend to be more charitable with their excellence scores. That is pretty typical for just about everything. Women are just more generous with scoring and sharing and you name it. We also have higher excellence scores among Xers and Boomers. And then to brag just a little bit, we develop apps for a number of different broadcast companies, and we isolated out a couple here that will remain nameless, where the excellence scores are quite a bit higher than our 54% average. So lots of smiles down there in the jacapps development pit where they actually do all this stuff. In terms of overall app usage, what's going on? Well, about a third of those who own a smartphone or tablet who have apps say that they regularly use 10 or more apps on a weekly basis. And you can see the biggest app pigs tend to be millennials, Xers, and Gen Z. Again, not at all a surprise that younger people are more likely to engage with technology of all kinds, but certainly mobile apps. But here's something that's very important as well. Half of smartphone tablet owners say that they will delete apps that after a while they realize they aren't using anymore. So this is one reason why it's not a good idea to develop an app and sort of set it and forget it, right? Don't develop anything new about it. Don't improve it as time goes on, because ultimately, if people stop using your app, they're eventually going to end up deleting it.
So we also wanted to talk about the on-demand experience, podcasting. This is an area that we've been surveying for a number of years now, and we've seen some definite trends. And one of the big trends here is that mobile is really at the center of podcasting. People like their podcasts on the go.
So let's jump into that. We asked people who are weekly podcast listeners on what device do they actually regularly listen to podcasts. And so here's where you can see exactly what Bob is talking about. 3/4 say that they regularly listen to podcasts on their mobile phones. 4 of every 10 regularly listen on a desktop or laptop computer, about a quarter tablets, and about a fifth in-car audio systems. But ultimately, it is the smartphone that is the main conduit to listening to podcasts. And again, when we actually, color it out for you here, you can really see the various gadgets and devices. So there's smartphones in that big gold color, tablets also highlighted, and even smart speakers now beginning to actually come on when it comes to podcast consumption. Where are people when they are listening to podcasts? Well, again, all roads lead back to the car, right? Whether we're talking about radio or podcasting. And as you can see, the number one listening location for regular podcast listeners is, in fact, a vehicle, followed by people who are hanging around the house doing stuff, people zoning out and doing nothing, and then people who are at work. But again, the number one consumption point is, in fact, the car.
So the last thing we wanted to talk about is the emerging issue of privacy and how that affects how people are using technology. Over the last year, year and a half, as there have been a number of high-profile things with Facebook and a number of the other social platforms and with some of the commerce sites, privacy has really become a thing. And so we started asking about it this year to really see how people felt about their devices with regards to privacy.
So I would say privacy is the new black, but that's cliche, so I won't say that. But let's actually take a look at how flipped out people actually are by what may be happening to their personal data. Here's the agree-disagree statement below the pie. I'm concerned about the ways in which tech companies are using my personal data. And look at this, 3/4 say they strongly agree or agree with that statement. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. Men clearly more bugged about how their personal data is using, and in a reverse of what we usually see with technology adoption, it actually is the older respondents who are more concerned about privacy. And the insight that I would share with you, we do a lot of focus groups and listener advisory boards, and especially among teens and 20-somethings, when we talk about privacy, a lot of them say, you know what, there is no privacy anymore. They have everything about us. They know who we are, what we're doing, where we are, and we just want to enjoy technology, so we just don't care. And we see that actually reflected in a number of Techsurvey slides. Where does this impact radio? Well, one of the things that we've been proponents of over the last several years is the ability to be able to capture data from those who stream your radio station. So we've been asking this question, would you be willing to register? And we define that by providing your name, an email address, and a zip code in order to listen to your favorite radio station stream. Now look at the top of that chart. In 2016, 7 of every 10 people said, no problem, be happy to do it. It fell in 2017, ticked back up a little bit in 2018, and now is down to 60%. And we think there is a direct correlation between some of the things that Bob talked about, data breaches, hacking, what's been going on with Facebook and social media, clearly beginning to have an impact on not just those companies, but everybody. And this really underscores the need for people to trust your brand, because when we develop apps, more and more, we want to make them as interactive as absolutely possible. So we wanted to find out in Techsurvey, what are people good with in terms of the basic permissions that might come with an app? Well, the good news is a majority say, yeah, I'm fine. You can send me push notifications. I'm good with that. Almost half say, I'll give you access to my location. But only about a quarter say you can have access to my camera. A little bit less access to my microphone. Only a fifth say, oh yeah, you can check out all my photos. And contacts, only 13%. Now we're going to continue to track this data every year in Techsurvey, but one of our concerns looking down the road is that if these privacy breaches continue, and there's no reason to believe that they won't, getting permission from people is going to become a little bit more difficult over time, and that's something that as radio broadcasters and app developers, we need to basically keep in mind. So let's put together the puzzle here. Let's just wrap this up, give you conclusions about how we see the data. That's the beauty of this stuff. Everybody walks away with a different view of what the data looks like. Here are the takeaways that Bob and I put together. And the first one is, we indicated earlier that it's not just smart speakers, it is the larger platform called voice. It is an important user interface now in homes and in cars. Remember, radios are disappearing from the home, and Echo Auto is coming to the car. So in fact, voice is going to be a way that more and more people will discover and use your radio station, your radio station's apps, and your podcasts.
The other thing that I think is really clear here is that podcasts were made for mobile. Having your station's podcasts available in your mobile app is the easiest way for your listeners to engage with them, to find them, and to consume that content.
And then this whole notion of in-car audio, and many of you know that Jacapps Media presented 3 Dash conferences back in 2013, 14, and 15, which were essentially mashups of the auto community and radio broadcasters. They were great events, and the NAB in particular has really picked up the baton and is doing some great work in the space, all the way down to what our metadata look like in the car on those touch screens. But clearly the car is changing rapidly. How people actually bring in their mobile phone and bring their content to their cars, critically important. And that's really where the mobile strategy kicks in here. You need an in-car plan here, an in-car strategy that involves the phone and ultimately voice, as we talked about before.
The foremost obvious words in this whole presentation, mobile devices are addictive. I think that slide we showed earlier showed people who basically should have been titled people who will admit they're addicted and people who won't admit they're addicted. But I think more and more of us are. And part of the reason for that is we're using our mobile devices for more and more daily tasks. It's becoming the go-to thing, whether it's Venmoing money to a friend, or in my case, my kids, or using Yelp to find a restaurant, or OpenTable, one of those. We are using them for everything. I don't even put money in parking meters anymore. I use my mobile app. So it's really happening for more and more things. And that means people are engaging with that device more and more, which means they have more and more opportunities to engage with your brand. And it's across all demos.
And really, to that point, what we've learned at jacapps over the past 10 plus years, we actually started the company about 100 days after Apple opened up its App Store in July 2008. And back then, all the apps really needed to do was provide a stream, right? Radio had lost its portability. Nobody had a Walkman anymore. And eventually, we saw this day when the smartphone could in fact become radio's portability answer. But now people are looking for more out of their apps. And if you have a built out brand with personality, with podcasts, maybe you do videos, all those kinds of things, having an app that actually incorporates those features and those use cases, critically important. You also need to promote and market your app. We see the data and we can tell when radio stations are talking about their apps and when they're talking about something else. And it's critically important. More and more people are getting brand new smartphones every day. Promote your apps and your other digital resources. It's a show and tell game that radio needs to do a better job of playing.
And finally, the privacy and data security issue is becoming huge. You probably work for a brand that has a certain amount of trust with the consumer. You need to earn that trust every day and protect it and take it very seriously, because we see this in the data. If there is a breach, if people start to not trust a brand, they do go away.
So we appreciate you being here today. jacapps can help you with a lot of different pieces that we've talked about today, from mobile apps, smart speakers, skills, certainly connected car advice. Push notifications is a big, big deal. Web applications as well, we do that as well. Overall digital planning, how do the pieces all fit together there? And then of course, the 800-pound gorilla in the room that we all want to get closer to, and that's revenue generation. So you can contact Sari. Sari's great. She's both a radio person and an apps person, left brain, right brain, all that good stuff. Give her a call, shoot her an email. She would be absolutely happy to put you in touch with the right service and the right person. We really appreciate you being here this afternoon going into a holiday weekend. We know everybody's busy. You're cranking out logs. You're getting your final details done. We're glad you could spend the last 45 minutes here with us. We're going to continue to do these webinars. We will be doing Techsurvey, the public radio version, coming up in just about a month or so, the Christian music radio version later on this summer. This data I like to think about as RAI, audience intelligence. So we really appreciate you being here. We hope this has been helpful. One last item, we did record this webinar, and Seth Ressler, our digital dot connector, will email you a copy of the video tomorrow latest. So have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Remember those who have sacrificed so much so that all of us could be free and do webinars and build apps and have great lives. So we really appreciate them. We appreciate you for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.